This is the world map today, or should I say, this is how it looks currently, because the lands are always moving and they don't always look like this. Let us go back 300 million years and see how the lands look like. We got to this section, the supercontinent of Pangea. This continent stays like this for about 100 million years before it actually gets broken apart. And after that, you really couldn't call this piece of land a single continent. It didn't break into 7 different pieces like today. At first, it broke into 2 pieces. One is Laurasia, and the other one is Gondwana land. Laurasia, which is basically in the northern hemisphere, consisted of North America, Europe, and Asia. Gondwana land, which was even bigger, had South America, Africa, plus the Arabian Peninsula, India, Australia, and Antarctica. And after plenty of time, these 2 continents turned into 7 different continents. And for centuries, humans had only seen 7 continents. But recently, we have found the 8th continent. But it's not a continent you've ever heard of or seen. It's a huge landmass that 94% of it is underwater. And only 6% of it is sticking out. New Zealand is a part of this continent, but the continent is called Zelandia. The size of this continent underwater is 4.9 million kilometers square. In the 17th century, Europeans were always looking for countries to conquer and take over, and the Dutch were very good at this early on. In the 17th century, the Dutch had always written that there is a lack of land in the southern hemisphere of Earth, and we still haven't found them. It's good to know that Australia was also discovered by the Dutch. They found Australia with this size, but they always still believed that there is more land down here. When the Dutch took over Indonesia, they had a base set up in Jakarta, and they would always travel to the southern hemisphere of Earth and try to look for new land. And of course, they find Australia first. But 36 after this date, they eventually find another piece of land in the year 1642. New Zealand. When they pulled up to New Zealand at first, they thought they made a mistake and they went back to Australia. But that was not Australia, and they quickly realized that they have made a mistake. Because the natives started to attack the Dutch, and with no hesitations, they told the man to hit the cannon. When the cannons fired, the natives didn't know what hit them, so they escaped. And the Dutch also escaped because it was not a good place to stay, and they planned on coming back. Eventually, the Dutch come back with more backup and take over New Zealand. They didn't know this back then, but they did find the land they were looking for. But they didn't know that 94% of the land they just found is still underwater. And 4 centuries later than this date, nobody still knew that there is a continent lost under New Zealand. Eventually, in the 21st century, with the help of satellites, they realized that there's a huge landmass under the ocean next to New Zealand. At first, they said this is a continent, and they gave it the name Zelandia. This is the 8th continent, but it's not respected and nobody recognizes it as a real continent yet. You might say this is all underwater, who gives a crap? But that's not the case, because Zelandia is slowly moving up, and even though New Zealand is the highest point of this continent, is also moving up, and that is why Zelandia is considered the youngest continent in the world. But why is it the youngest? Because Pangea had land that was much older than 200-300 million years. It is true that they separated 300 million years ago, but the land itself is much older than that. But Zelandia has not really been born yet, and it's like a newborn baby, and the head is New Zealand itself, and the rest still needs to show itself. So that is why it's considered the youngest, because it only has an age of 550 million years. But other pieces of land could reach 1 billion years plus. Some might say this is not a continent. This is just the ocean floor that's a little bit mountainous. But it's not like that. Geologists say this piece of land of Zelandia is much different than the bottom of the ocean. One of the main reasons is that Zelandia is mainly made up of limestone and granite. You don't really see that in the normal ocean floor. And most of the ocean floor that's rock is made up of basalt, not limestone or granite. And another reason to call it a continent is that it's completely connected to New Zealand, and it's not a random piece in the middle of the ocean. Geologists say back in the day, New Zealand was connected to Australia, and the reason they say that is that there's dinosaur bones inside New Zealand, and that shows us that New Zealand was not an island. When Gondwana land breaks up, 4 continents were formed, but that's plus India and the Arabian Peninsula. South America, Africa, Antarctica, and Australia separated from one another, and the Arabian Peninsula and the Indian subcontinent smashed themselves into Asia. These two hitting Asia basically created the Zagros mountain range in Iran, and the Indian subcontinent caused the Himalayas to be formed. In this situation, another piece separates from Australia, and that's New Zealand, and more than 90% of it is still underwater. Even though New Zealand was separated from Australia, but its animals is much different. Like there was a bird that used to live in New Zealand called the elephant bird, one of the biggest animals in the world. You could say the elephant bird is similar to the cassowary or the emu, but it was much bigger and stronger. But it's not around anymore because it went extinct about 800 years ago. There's another weird bird that's only found in New Zealand. It's called the Kiwi bird, and it's kind of similar to a chicken. It's not a chicken obviously, and it has a very cute, distinct look. Its meat is similar to chicken, and they used to eat it a while back, but of course, they made it illegal because the population is very low and they're endangered. And they didn't want the Kiwi bird to go extinct like the elephant bird. Eventually, Zelandia is gonna stick its head out and show the entire continent, but we're not sure when. Earth is a living thing and it's always changing. You think these changes have stopped? No, it never stops. But the movement is so slow that you really can't see it with the naked eye. Like the Arabian Peninsula is always putting pressure on the Eurasian plate and the Anatolian plate, and that causes a lot of earthquakes like the Turkey and Syria one. This pressure causes the Persian Gulf to close up a few centimeters a year, and from the other side, the Red Sea gets a little wider. These movements cause a lot of issues, and the main things are earthquakes. If you want to see the Earth's movement that caused the Turkey and Syria earthquake, please watch our video on it. It's very interesting. Either way, all these movements, or Zelandia sticking its head up, is not seen by the eye because it's so slow, and it's maybe a couple inches a year, so it needs millions of years to actually show itself. We only see the problems it causes, earthquakes, and worst of all, tsunamis.